Okay, so I think we're going to get started with this morning's webinar. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're Legatics, and today's topic for our webinar is transforming legal transactions with Legatics. And I'm very happy to say I've been joined by one of our customers today, Dentons, and I've got two of the Dentons team joining us this morning. We have Joe Cohen, who is Head of Innovation for Dentons UK, Ireland and Middle East, as well as Steve Knight, who is a partner in the banking and finance group in the Middle East also. So just a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do this morning. We're going to do some quick introductions in terms of who I am and who I've got joining me this morning in terms of our guest speakers. And then we're going to jump into a conversation around how Legatics has been used at Dentons to transform the way that they are working and answer some questions around that. At the end of that section, we'll have time for some Q&A. So during the webinar, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A and we'll cover them off at the end. And then also we'll follow up at the end with some instructions and details of what the next steps are for the attendees as well and how we'll follow up with you. So thanks again for joining us this morning. I'm going to just stop my screen share now and we're going to move to having a good chat really. So morning, I'm Sally Roberts. Before we get going, I just thought it'd be useful for me to introduce myself. I'm Head of Customer at Legatics. I joined Legatics in February of this year. So I'm fairly new to the Legatics family, but not new really to the sector. Prior to joining Legatics, I was working to head up the customer success team for NetDocuments, a document management system platform in the UK. But prior to that, I was working at HiQ, a Thomson Reuters collaboration platform that you may be familiar with. And before that, I was working with law firms consulting and actually spent some time working in law firms as well. So the customers and the legal world are familiar, and it's been very interesting to see how Legatics is moving to transform it even further with the work that it does. So just next, I'd like to hand over to Joe to introduce himself briefly. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. So yeah, my name's Joe Cohen. I'm the Head of Innovation for Dentons UK, Ireland, Middle East. So typically that's about trying to make our matters run more efficiently across the business. So, corporate, real estate, disputes, but also predominantly in this case, banking. So we've got, an innovation process and lots of ideas gathering methods I'm going to talk about over the course of this webinar. And yeah, glad to be here. Thanks, Sally.
You're on mute, Sally.
Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Sally, and thanks for Legatics for setting this up. So I'm Steve Knight. I'm a banking and finance partner at Dentons. I'm based in Abu Dhabi, and I've been in Abu Dhabi since 2008. I've been with Dentons for 5 years. In the Middle East, because the way we're set up, we're sort of a Middle East banking and finance practice. So we're regularly working with colleagues across offices, whether it's Abu Dhabi, Dubai, whether it's in Muscat or Doha or Saudi, Riyadh, Jordan, Egypt. So trying to use technology across borders to make sure we operate in an efficient manner is really important for us, as well as the world's largest law firm. We're often working with people in, I guess, sort of South America, Asia. So using, again, technology to help us communicate and run deals efficiently is really important for us. So hopefully we'll give you a few examples of how we've used Legatics to help that bring that together and deliver excellent service for our customers.
That's great, thank you. So before we move on, I'm aware that we have some people on this call who perhaps have not used Legatics before. I just wanted to explain at a very, very high level what it is and what we do. So in essence, Legatics is a transaction management platform which enables you to track and manage the process of your transactions from inception to closing in one place. It was created by our CEO, Anthony Steele, and was originally put together with the primary focus of closing and CP checklists within finance transactions. As the platform has developed, our use cases have grown, and we now support over 40 use cases from corporate to litigation to employment to tax. So we'll follow up at the end with instructions on how you can find out more about Legatics. But for now, we're going to move on and talk to Dentons about their experiences. So to get us started, I wonder, I think perhaps one for you, Joe, to talk us through why really did you procure Legatics initially?
Yeah, absolutely. So suppose the kind of the high level answer to that is we have innovation committees across all of our practice areas, right? So they're kind of a mix of partners and associates, and that's kind of how we try to stay close to the coalface by meeting with those guys once a month, and figuring out ways to gather business problems from not just those groups, but also their wider practice areas. And so through it was actually a number of years ago now, that there was a need identified to a better way to run to manage our transactions, to manage our deal checklists, CP checklists, and that kind of thing. So at that time, we kind of had a look at the market. We identified Legatics and a couple of others. We then kind of did a side-by-side pilot, gathered feedback, and then kind of ultimately decided that Legatics was the one that we kind of wanted to partner with. A few different reasons that we'll go into over the course of this call, but yeah, it is generally it's the ideas from the lawyers and kind of those business problems that we're trying to solve.
And I think from my experience, that's where I've seen these kind of platforms and other tools having real success, where the drivers actually come from the fee earners themselves, and it's not something that's been driven from a sort of central IT initiative, which has been pushed out by those people who perhaps aren't actually using the platform day in, day out. So I think that's great, and I think that's something that our other customers can obviously keep in mind for ideas of how they can embed and encourage adoption by having those kind of real good stakeholders and champions there to identify what the problems are that they're really trying to solve. And I guess perhaps sort of moving backwards, I guess before you used Legatics, how were you working? Did you have any other existing software that were you using, or was it mainly, I guess, old-fashioned email?
Steve, maybe you want to talk about your experiences pre-Legatics.
No, sure. I think if you go back at the beginning of my career, so 2002, 2004, actually we were in physical signing territory where everyone would come, print documents out, put them in a signing room. People would go through and you get the signatories in, and you'd have to make sure they attended on time. And that's kind of how you run it. And obviously with a CP, on a project financing, for example, where you've got huge rooms full of paper and documents being signed, some coming last minute because somebody else is bringing to the table. The signing day or the signing week was always really, really challenging. And in order to make sure you didn't miss anything, you had a very, very thorough CP checklist. And then also in the signing room, we sort of took up like coloured bits of paper. So we used to print out a red, an orange, and a green piece of paper, put them on the table, so you knew what should be there. You knew what had been signed, and you knew what you signed off on. So actually, it helped you sort of track through. But it was a huge exercise in that, and not only was it time taken, you also mostly relied on trainees to do that work, and you also had, from a cost perspective, and obviously clients paying for that to be done. And what we're doing, or what we've seen in the past, is clients obviously not wanting to pay for trainees doing administrative tasks. And some of this stuff, it was administrative. So there was a challenge around sort of cost of delivery for us of our product and our services. There was also, once that final CP was done on screen, somebody had to go through and check everything again. So, you're trying to do a listing on the stock exchange. I remember one day where at 6 o'clock in the morning, before the stock exchange opened, you were going through with checking off that CP, and the board wanting to make the announcement, as they're saying, no, we need to go. And you're all up against the wire where mistakes may happen. So all of that sort of risk that came into that whole process, because of the pressure and the way it was done, was prevalent. So, and then email obviously came along, and people started doing things by email, but actually that didn't really improve it a huge amount. What you got is some documents early, some people signed a bit earlier, but actually some emails weren't delivered, some files were too large, some actually, then all of a sudden your inbox just gets inundated with loads of documents that have to be signed, and sometimes it crashes because there's too much in there. And so you're kind of there sort of trying to do the same thing that I've just talked about, but virtually, but with, again, high risk of sort of people wanting to ring up to say, have you got the document yet or not? So again, quite a stressful day in the end, but also lots of pressure as well to get that result fit across the line for the client in order for them to effectively get to financial close or the completion. So that's kind of how we used to do it. I'd say sort of, yes, it was probably better than it was back in 2002, but still lots of pressure.
Yeah, and I think there's one thing as well, is the whole kind of, you know, job satisfaction and sort of the health and sort of peace of mind for those trainees having to work so late in that pressured environment of that kind of working environment. And I know one of the things that, you know, our CEO Anthony, when he you know, he created the platform, was actually trying to give that time back, so focus on those high value rewarding tasks rather than the stuff that actually is low value and low reward. So that's really great, and thank you for those insights, Steve. I think it would be good to move on to talk about a specific matter, if you can, to the extent you can share, that you use Legatics on. So I don't know if you can give you an overview of an example, and then we can dig a bit deeper in some of the particular features.
No, sure. So we used Legatics on a transaction where the core English law, UAE law team were based in Abu Dhabi, or in the UAE, and it was acquisition financing for an entity on a stock exchange in a South American jurisdiction. So we had a team from the UAE, a team from Luxembourg, a team from Panama, a team from South America, and a team from New York representing the lender. And obviously the borrower and the sponsors had an equivalent matching team in the same jurisdictions. So effectively we're trying to coordinate across 10 jurisdictions and what was sort of 10 teams in sort of 5 jurisdictions with competing time zones. And so we use, and actually there was a very similar transaction going on. There was actually more than one, so similar transaction going on at the same time. And because it was an acquisition of a listed entity, you've also got, from a timing perspective, very real demands around deadlines. So we were asked to do this transaction in about 3 weeks, 3-4 weeks from start to finish. So very demanding on the legal documentation and getting that into shape, but also trying to get all of those conditions precedent satisfied. So we used Legatics on that deal. And I think the one thing that we sort of really benefited from was that sort of the real-time interaction that Legatics provides. So obviously you've got your CP checklist, and it's virtual, so it's on screen. You can upload documents like you can do for a data room normally, so it had that functionality, and that was all very good. But also the benefits were it showed you the status of all of the CPs, and you could link in or click into what you had to do, and also you could get a really good snapshot of the overview as to what the overall status of the matter was. And so, you know, as sort of the final week approaches, people were uploading documents and we're going through, pushing them through, satisfying some hadn't been signed yet, but sort of pushing them, the constitutional documents are uploaded. And then it sort of gets to, I guess, sort of 2 days or a day beforehand, and we've got a closing call, and we're just trying to sort of sort things out. And actually the closing call was only an hour. It happened at my time, 7 o'clock at night. And we managed to have we went through the CPs from the ones that were almost done to get them agree into a satisfied form. That's actually quite an important way to do it, because it means you don't duplicate. So we started off with those ones that were in agreed form but not yet satisfied, then sort of work backwards to those ones that needed to still be done but weren't in agreed form, et cetera, or needed to be provided. And as we were on the call, actually the teams across the jurisdictions who needed to upload something from Panama or from Luxembourg were actively uploading that. So by the end of the call, not only had we progressed the CPs, most all but 2 of them had been satisfied actually on the call, and it was uploaded, and you know, it popped into your thing, your letter, something's been done, so you could sign off in real time that yes, I've seen that document, it's satisfied now, rather than have to send an email back, and everyone could just see that it had been done. So it really helped progress the deal. And again, we did both deals effectively at the same time over an hour call, and we woke up the next morning and it was all done with very little work. So from a trainee mental health perspective, there was no late, long night, which is, and one of the associates on my team said, what's the benefit of this? I said, well, you got some sleep, and the cross border. And for clients, it was around, actually, we met the deadline with time to spare. Yeah, I don't know, maybe we'll get onto later on, but actually from a cost perspective, our fees on that file for that client were a lot lower than they would have been. From a profitability perspective, our profit was a lot higher than it probably would have been if I had done something else. So this was just a case of it being a win-win for everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing the detail on that as well. I think it's really good to get those first-hand anecdotes, and I know that a lot of our customers would be very interested to hear. One of the things that we sometimes come up against is obviously resistance to this kind of change. And obviously you talked about multiple jurisdictions. Have you, on this transaction in question or on any other pieces of work, ever encountered any sort of resistance, maybe cultural or just from a change perspective of getting people to move to a different way of working?
I don't know, I think our probably biggest challenge, Joe, was probably the onboarding process, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the general kind of onboarding of the platform itself, I'd say it was fairly easy for the kind of non-current Legatics clients on the call. You know, there are integrations to be had, and that makes adoption easier. So the DocuSign, SSO, I know that the iManage integration is coming to Legatics too shortly, and we're very much looking forward to having that. I think, yeah, there are definitely kind of two sides to this. The first is you know, willingness of lawyers to kind of port over their processes, and there are different things that we do, and Steve's obviously a big champion, but just more generally across the banking team in the UK and the corporate team have really taken to it fantastically over the last year, actually. That there are different ways to kind of encourage people to use it, but actually because a platform like this, like a lot of legal tech actually is kind of used just by the lawyers, and the client don't necessarily know, your delivery models. They don't necessarily care either. As long as they're getting good client service, they will ask that you are kind of leveraging the right technology so that they're getting, quick delivery, high quality, also low fees. That's fine. But actually, in the case of Legatics, clients and lots of other third parties need to be involved. Invited to collaborate on the platform. So that makes it a little bit more challenging, particularly when you consider that the banks themselves do have quite onerous information security requirements pretty much across the industry. There are different reasons for that. I mean, our information security requirements are also very high. Banks are very big institutions that kind of sometimes can make it more challenging. However, one of the things that Legatics has done, which we do applaud, is their efforts to work with the banks on onboarding and whitelisting, which is, I mean, partly because it's not really a problem we face with other platforms, but we haven't seen any other providers take that level of proactivity. So it has been quite difficult, but it's that end client necessity to be involved has made it a little bit more challenging, whereas other products, we haven't necessarily had that problem.
That's interesting, and and that's great feedback for us as well to hear. Obviously, that that we're able to help you and get you going, and that we're able to provide you the support that you need on that infosec piece. We moved on a little bit, but I wondered if we could just go back to a little bit around the matter we were talking about, maybe focusing on some of the more quantitative things around time savings. So you mentioned that you had 3 weeks to complete that particular deal. When that first came to you, is that usual? Is that a normal amount of time? Is that something that you think would be achievable if you didn't have Legatics? I just wondered if you could give a little bit more information about that.
I would say that being based in Abu Dhabi, a lot of my clients do expect some fast turnaround time, so not necessarily unusual. I think that if this was just a transaction in the UAE, for example, that turnaround time probably it might happen, it might be required, but actually the unique thing around this was it was a multi-jurisdictional and trying to pull people across the global or the globe on different time zones. So that's probably the biggest challenge. I mean, generally for this type of deal, you're probably talking about 3 months to be able to do it. So a lot on the legal side, on the sort of legal document side, but we were able to sort of do the CP process in parallel from the beginning and just get it up and running. So the ease around when we had the first draft of the facility agreement, we knew what the CPs were. the feature on Legatics that allows you to effectively copy and paste the CP checklist or the CP schedule into Legatics, and it automatically figures out or puts them all on separate rows for you. So it helps you sort of do your first draft of a CP checklist. You know, if I go back to how that used to be done pre-Legatics, it was the same thing. I always tell the trainees, don't start from a previous CP checklist. It's not going to be helpful. You'll miss something. What you need to do is go through the CP checklist and the CP schedule of facility agreement, copy and paste it into a Word document, convert it into a table, then add the columns, build it up, then you add the rows for each obligor, and actually just creating the CP checklist itself. Legatics saves you time on that because you can just, you can say what obligor means and then say which ones are they. It automatically puts the row item for you. So that feature is very much welcome. And so much so that actually, even if our end clients don't use it or don't see it, internally we've been using Legatics as an internal process for being able to sort of manage CPs because of the speed of which that can be done, and just create that CP checklist. And obviously, as you go along, you can amend it as you see fit in a way that sort of doesn't lose any of the functionality or inputs that you've previously told the platform. So that's at the front end. At the back end, the Bible. Again, the Bible normally, from a lawyer perspective, or law firm perspective, the Bible normally gets done at the end of the deal, obviously, once the final bill's been issued. And for us, it's dead time. It's just an admin cost. And again, normally we need a trainee who's been involved in the deal just to sort of sense check in, make sure everything's there. You're going to spend a bit of time. You've got your CP checklist. You've probably done a bit of filing, but as I said, there's probably documents in an email somewhere that haven't yet been uploaded onto the file, but you've received it because of the time at doing the deal and the pressure. You haven't sort of saved it down. Legatics, it's on the system, and with a click of a button, it basically creates a Bible for you, and you can just download all of the documents all at once. So none of this searching through emails. Was this the right version? Did I ask for it to be re-signed, etc., etc.? So really, really efficient. The other sort of really useful function was, you can you drag and drop the documents across into Legatics, and by dragging it over the top of an existing document, it replaces that document but keeps the base copy. So if you needed to go back and find out what the earlier version looked like, it's there for you, but just doesn't clutter up the view that you get. So you can always access the most current version. Like I think at the data rooms I've seen, you might have seen older versions, people delete them, but this actually just sits above it, so you can always get the latest version, but the ability to go back in time and look at some of the more historic versions if you needed to. So they were sort of like three really key features to be able to do it. And the other place is like a deal room. Normally, it's like everything's in one place. So that's really really helpful. And then sort of from just a transaction management perspective, nobody ever wants to be on a CP call with a client saying, why have you not done this? Why have you not done that? It's all in your court. Well, actually, the feature around at the outset, or the overview that says, this is for you, it's been allocated for you. You can go through and click on the button, and it just tells you exactly what you need to do. So no scanning through pages of an old CP checklist that might have been out of date, or actually somebody else has sent you and you haven't seen the email. You just click on it and you just clear your inbox, if I can call it that, in order to make sure no one's pointing the finger at you. And that's a really helpful feature, because actually then everyone sort of cooperates and takes action. As I said, that feature of itself meant that we were able to close that transaction, the transaction we talked about, within an hour of really focusing on the CPs.
Yeah, and I think there's quite a lot of things to cover off there. I mean, I guess one thing, obviously, there's an efficiency gain with time. There's people focusing on the right tasks and not these low value things. I think there's a huge risk management piece as well, particularly when you mentioned about the Bibling. So those are the documents that have actually been used and signed and referred to. You haven't got that that risk of people picking up incorrect versions and old versions on email that you suggested as well. And I think as well that accountability and visibility. So internally, as well as people being able to see what's allocated to them in terms of where they need to take action. And then from your client side, they've got that visibility of progress. And And again, I think that's something that, historically sometimes law firms have not wanted to share, or with where they are with things with their client for the wrong reasons potentially. But this, obviously, I think it also helps with the relationship that you have with your clients as well, because they can see that you're being visible with progress and where you are, and tracking of the actions and tasks that you've done. I just wanted to come back to one thing that you mentioned, was around obviously the work that you did on this. You said it was reduced fees for your client. I guess in that way that could be seen as a barrier because you can charge less for it. But on the upside, it freed your time to be able to then go on and do another piece of work or do multiple pieces of work at the same time. I just wondered, maybe have you ever had any partner pushback internally, or any objections raised to the fact that this is actually going to stop you charging as much?
I don't think so, because I mean, conceptually, this is just about being like, the reality of the situation is that we work in a capped fee industry generally, and this is about, invariably a lot of these deals, the way that we account internally, even on fixed fee matters, is about how we allocate and use our time. And so just because we can do something more efficiently actually means to say that we can be more competitive because we know how much it costs, therefore we can win more deals and do more deals. Actually, so if I can get an extra, if I save $5,000 on a file just because I've used Legatics, but I freed somebody up, and at that time I can, that saving allows me to go and put in a bid for 5 other matters at $5,000 cheaper and get below somebody else. Actually, that's a better win. So I think on all of this, you can look at the individual on a file by file matter, but if you look at the overall practice and what it does to you for being able to leverage your resource in the most efficient manner, then you end up with not necessarily going over caps in the way that you might have done. I'm not saying that we never ever go over caps, but it just changes the dynamic a little bit around expectation.
Yeah, so it's an opportunity rather than an objection or a kind of a resistance to it.
But you're right. So, it is a mindset change around how you approach that.
Yeah,
and as kind
of
Steve,
sorry,
and as kind of Steve said before, around the Bibling time, but more generally the kind of the checklist admin time and the combination and the version control and just the updating of the checklist is more likely to be time that's kind of written off at the end, and so that's the time that Legatics is saving. And so actually, are we really billing less if it's going to be written off anyway? I think is kind of, and that is a sort of similar argument that we see for other legal technology tools of, yes, it allows us to kind of be more profitable in the kind of fixed cap fee market, but actually what kind of time is it saving? And just from a people perspective, that's generally not the kind of work that our junior lawyers want to be doing anyway. They would rather not have to do that. So yeah, I think that there is usually a win-win, but it also can be a mindset change.
Yeah, and I think perhaps for people who haven't worked on these kind of transactions or not, have not been lawyers themselves, it's perhaps underestimating the amount of admin that there can be on actually not with legal work. It's not always that, it's the setting up and getting your processes right. It actually takes that time. I just wanted to move on a little bit, and maybe these questions a little bit more directed to you, Joe, around, I guess, going back to when you originally started using Legatics and how you approached the rollout, and maybe some things around how you thought to introduce it to the firm and get people trained up, and what was your approach to that?
We are going back a while. I mean, we have kind of developed that over the years. Training sessions are very important, but regular use case kind of showcases are also kind of paramount within the practice group. So we do kind of firm-wide webinars, and those are helpful. But normally they will be for kind of a number of products, and actually you need to target the right teams for tools like Legatics, which are not necessarily going to be used across the entire firm. So we do that. We've got our own In fact, Legatics is the one tool where we have developed kind of very specific guidance on exactly how and when it should be used on banking deals, and we update that regularly. The banking team is known for its, well, at least in our firm, for its very kind of comprehensive templates and guidance and kind of knowledge dispersion, and Legatics is part of that, really. So we've tried very hard to integrate it as far as possible into matter processes, and try make it more like business as usual. So I think all of those things are important, but again, as with most things, a lot of it comes from the top and saying, yeah, we're going to be using this. What we still do run into those problems of can't put for banking clients, particularly, that kind of struggle with cloud adoption is maybe slightly behind other industries. So that's still it is a bit of a problem for us, but it's we still get quite a number of matters in Legatics per month, and we're trying to continue to grow that as well.
And it's interesting to say about the sort of business as usual approach. So again, where we've seen success with other customers is when we're talking about that particular process, for example, CP checklist, and rather than saying this is how we do the CP checklist and referring to the paper version or the hard copy version that they may have, the actual Word document, it's actually, this is what we use Legatics, and Legatics is in that process and embedded from the very start. But that's actually just how we work for that, rather than them being an alternative. And that's sort of something that's put in place for example, for the new joiners, for trainees when they're joining, that that's what they start using from the word go.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I think the other thing just to say, Sally, the other function of Legatics is actually, if you wanted the Word version of the CP checklist, you can actually just download it. So it does create it for you. So again, if your client necessarily wants the Word version for whatever reason, to send it internally, to annotate it for whatever reason they want, that functionality and option is there. So it doesn't change the way you work or use it, but it just gives you that ability to, it doesn't have to be an either or situation.
Yeah, and actually that comes back to one of the things you mentioned around, you said that, so say for example, you do have some issues with client consent, or that you're not able to get over that hurdle in terms of them using it. Legatics could just be used as an internal tool itself, so we wouldn't have to involve the client in the platform. You could actually use some, not necessarily for closing, but for some elements, you could just use it as a way of managing your work internally and setting up and allocating tasks out as well.
I think it depends on the client terms as to what that particular client says, because some clients do say you can't use this at all, even on your internal.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah. But in terms of them, perhaps if there was a barrier to them just actually wanting to work in a different way, rather than it being around the cloud piece, you could actually just manage some of the projects, in Legatics, just because it improves your internal efficiencies.
Correct. Yeah. And the other way that we use this, it's always like I do some financings for a corporate borrower who actually goes, they're all bilateral. So rather than doing a club financing, has multiple bilateral facilities, and they all get negotiated all at once. And the other function of Legatics that they found really useful is the module element. So actually having multiple CP checklists on the one site. And so from the CFO's perspective, he gets to see the summary snapshot of all of the 10 different facilities. So he knows where to push, as opposed to having 10 different websites he needs, or 10 different CP checklists. So he gets not just the view of that one particular financing, he can get all of his financing and all of the documents in one place. And so he's found that really, really helpful.
And that's interesting, actually. We've heard that feedback quite recently. That's a real benefit of Legatics, to be able to use those multiple lists in essentially one site or one matter. Whereas I think in some other tools, essentially you're having to revisit different matters to carry out those different tasks that have been allocated to you, or to see that progress.
Yeah, you just have to be careful on the security, but yes.
Yes, of course. I guess on the flip side as well, one of the things that we've also heard is where, as clients are actively asking law firms what they do in terms of technology, how they go about do they use technology to support legal transactions or the way they work as part of essentially procuring law firm services? Maybe Joe, that's one for you, perhaps not necessarily just Legatics, but do you see that coming up quite frequently?
I mean, innovation and use of legal technology has been a staple of transaction pitches and wider panel tenders for a while now, for at least a couple of years. So the minimum expectation is for you to say, here are the tools that you use. But in the last year, 18 months, the clients, particularly when you get to the interview stage or wanting more detail, will ask you for case studies of show us how you've used it, tell us exactly how you will use it on matters. So certainly at the tender stage, innovation is now just a normal part of the pitch, and if you don't have anything useful to say there, then you're probably unlikely to actually get appointed. There is a bit of a disparity between what we say that we have and we use and we show that we use at that stage, and subsequent client pressure on matters after that to use the tools. And I was actually at a presentation from Richard Susskind the other day, who said that one of the things that he has actually got wrong from his Tomorrow's Lawyers, series, really, it's been out for quite a while, was he overestimated client kind of pressure that they were willing to put on law firms to adopt these technologies. He actually didn't say, he said he didn't actually fully understand why that hasn't materialized to the level that he thought it would. So yes, on one hand, clients are fully cognizant of, right, here are the different types of technologies we expect you to be using, show us that you have used them and that you're willing to use them, but on a deal by deal basis, there's not always the same level of pressure, which I think has been quite interesting. And then, if there isn't, then it kind of falls on us. And by us, I mean, my team, talking to the lawyers, making sure they're using the right tools, or people like Steve to take the initiative and say, right, okay, well, you haven't forced us to use, these 3 different technologies that we could use on this matter, but actually I'm going to do it anyway. So that's kind of, I think, where the legal industry is at the moment.
And how do you go about, I guess, like promoting the successes of Legatics internally or externally? So you mentioned there about sharing, what you've done. Is that something you sort of actively do, and how do you do it? Like, is it through the use of stakeholders or champions? Is it through sort of communications that you do? How do you, I guess, spread the word and try and ramp up that support and adoption?
Yeah, so we do go probably at least a few times a year to the subgroups within banking to present on the tools that are available to them, and Legatics is always part of that. So we'll make someone like Steve, or more likely one of the associates who's kind of been in the weeds of the deal, to say, yeah, we used Legatics in this case and it saved. It's quite difficult sometimes to quantify exactly what the saving was, but we have had to go at that before. It can be a bit time intensive just to carry out that exercise. But yeah, so there's certainly the presenting on the use cases is very important. Getting leadership involved as well, to say, actually, for all these types of deals, we have to be using it. That's also kind of crucial. I think there's certainly there's a kind of a bottom-up approach of training and kind of word of mouth between the associates. Say, well, if you do, try and make sure that you can kind of shoehorn this into your deal, because it's going to make your life a lot easier. But then also the top-down approach of, the head of banking saying, well, we've got to be using this on all the banking matters. Or actually, Steve's a banking finance partner, obviously, so we've been a bit more focused on CP checklist, but on the corporate side, they've really taken to it well, and probably 5-6 matters a month from the corporate team make their way into Legatics at the moment, and we have been heartened by that as well.
I think the other thing, just to add, Joe, I mean, we're as a Middle East banking and finance team, we don't have associates working for one partner, so associates work for and trainees work for the team as a whole. So some of this is by leading by example. So on all my matters, I will say to the associate or trainee that's helping me, I want to use Legatics, and they just by doing it, they realize how easy it is to do, and then they just translate that into they just use that in the next matter for a different partner in the team. And I think our take up in our team has been sort of relatively successful, just because they're just used now to using it as a matter of course. So it does take that. Again, it might be slightly different, for example, to ask our corporate team to do that, just because there's not that level of crossover in the same way in terms of sort of day-to-day usage of it. So, but our corporate team are using it as well in the Middle East as well as in the UK.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it also with all of this, it's like continual education. We know that we tell people about it at the start of one particular month, and then they're busy, they don't come back to it again. So I think it's just like planting those seeds and that continual education around telling what the benefits are, and using spreading the word by using those success stories that you've had. And I guess as well is like some of the best feedback you can have, and the best sort of driver for usage and adoption is what your clients say and what your client feedback is. So anything that you can share on, on that in terms of where you've had specific feedback from clients, is there anything you can tell us about that?
Sometimes the best feedback is no feedback, right? So you don't get the complaints.
Yeah.
So I think, like I guess on some of this it's around the benefits. So that CFO who kind of liked the idea, you could see the snapshot was really good feedback. The client being happy that we closed the deal in record time is really good feedback, and again sort of making use of our global network to be able to do that at the same time. I don't think there's necessarily been any sort of actually there was actually one client that turned around and said to me, yeah, I used it for the first time, I really like the functionality, and actually been actively embracing it. And that was somebody based in Bahrain, actually actively been working with it to see the functionality of it. So there was that. So occasionally you do get it, but I'm going to say from a legal or from a lawyer perspective, sort of, as I said, sometimes no feedback is showing you're doing the right thing as well. So and the repeated deals that come as a result of knowing you can do faster. So that's kind of that's really what you're after.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, the proof is in the kind of no news, good news, and that continued work, I guess. So we're coming to the end of this really, and we're going to go to some questions in a moment. But I guess really just any advice that you would give to other firms who are looking to implement Legatics, and anything sort of tips and tricks you could say, things that you did that worked well, and maybe things that didn't work so well that people should maybe avoid.
Well, yeah, I think I would try and, you got to make sure that it is you can do enough of this type of work, right? There'll be some firms that just don't have that transactional element, enough of kind of the repeat work for it to be useful. So I think that I'd probably start there. But assuming that you have identified, yeah, we've run a lot of transactions and Legatics looks like a good tool. You make sure that you've got the senior department stakeholders kind of involved to say, actually, yes, we could definitely see ourselves using this. We're willing to kind of sponsor its usage and kind of help you push that out. But also do a pilot. Definitely do a pilot on a couple of matters. We always do pilots before we implement things. In fact, I can't remember the last time we didn't do a pilot of something before we rolled it out. During that pilot, don't feel the need to necessarily do all of the integrations. You don't need to have the iManage integration or DocuSign integration, even the single sign-on integration, really, although that's a much shorter one. Should be. I think you should be testing from a kind of core perspective. How's the functionality? Does it work for us? Could our lawyers predominantly see themselves using it? What feedback do they have? Ultimately, do they think it's going to make their lives easier? Do they think it's going to save time and improve client service? So yeah, make sure you've got the right sponsorship. Do a pilot on either on a certain number of matters or just for a certain number of months, and then you can look at kind of rolling out in the department. If you do decide to do that, make sure you do plenty of training. Speak to try and push out in the right departments as widely as possible. And yeah, one of the crucial things we've mentioned this a few times already is you can't we always say that once you've got to the end of the first part of the rollout, that is kind of the easy bit. You know, the procurement, the pilot, the rollout. It's actually making sure people don't forget about it. And product adoption is you know, is at the moment and has been for a while one of our key priorities. So making sure you're talking about successes and use cases, that's really important. Having some one-on-ones with some partners and associates, and just make sure that it's always front of mind, because otherwise, you know, for the best, despite the best intentions, things can kind of fall by the wayside.
The other things I would just add on that one is, I agree with Joe around sort of on the pilot side, but also keep it simple to start off with. You know, if you're trying to do, for example, we talked about multi-jurisdictional, a cross-border deal on something that needs to be done pretty quickly. That wasn't our first deal. We tried it on something else first. But if you're going to do that in your first deal and it doesn't work, you're going to have time pressure and you're not going to do it because you say, I failed, right? So start off on sort of simple and secured loans if you're going to do it, if it's a facility agreement, and just get used to the functionality. And actually, you'll find that as you use it differently. So early this week, for example, I'm doing, again, a sort of multi-jurisdictional facility, and it's got a large security package. And I actually used Legatics. The CP checklist was set up, again, when the first draft of the facility agreement was done. And I actually used Legatics for work allocation amongst those teams by tagging, using the tagging function. And again, so as you sort of adapt, you'll find different ways to use it and to save time. And that saved me from having to send an email to everybody about, like, by the way, all these documents are set up, et cetera, et cetera. And they've all got it and they've all actioned it, and we've got the drafts uploaded now. So there's different, as you say, there's different ways how you're going to use it at the beginning is not necessarily how you end up using it eventually. And it's just, like I say, hate the word, but a journey that you need to go on to find out how best works for you in your institution. The other thing I would say is, actually, you know, it wouldn't work for us if we just did it. We need other law firms to adopt it. You know, we need transaction counsel on the other side to adopt it. So, you know, when we set up Legatics, I reached out to the head of innovation at one of my previous firms who was using it and said, how do you use it? And sort of had some stories from him. And that sort of, you know, that really helps in terms of like embracing the technology, because it's in all of our interests to make this technology work.
Yeah, I think there's some really good knowledge shared there in terms of, you know, what's worked well. The simplicity thing I think is really important. I know that sometimes when we train and we show the platform, we're very keen to show off everything and all the different features and everything you can do. And sometimes it's better just to focus on a very particular process. And one of the questions that we've had is actually around that kind of training approach. And it's sort of asking what have you seen work well in terms of training? Is it kind of face-to-face? Is it online? Is it interactive? Or how did you go about that in terms of the method that you use?
Well, I mean, yeah, these days, you know, most training is kind of virtual, because we've got, you know, we've got it just in our region. We've probably got about 10 or 15 offices, so it does make it very difficult. Obviously, that is in Abu Dhabi, as you said, so it can get a bit difficult to do it in person. But we have been to a number of in the London office, where we've got kind of the bulk of the headcount in the region. We do in-person meetings. We do come along. We do, you know, it is good to kind of have that captive audience. So yeah, it's definitely a mixture of both.
But I would also just add, there is no replacement for doing it yourself. It's like any legal training. Do you really learn if somebody does a presentation to you around whether it's a piece of law or a piece of know-how or technology? Somebody's showing you a process compared to actually you doing it yourself. Just irreplaceable, and you'll figure it out if you do it yourself. So you kind of that sort of the virtual training, seeing the product and what it's supposed to do is great. But actually, if you really want adoption, you kind of need somebody to really feel the benefits, and you can only get that if they do it themselves.
Yeah, it's that hands-on, really, isn't it? And you know, that's why I think, you know, the fact that we can have you know, the ability to create what we call like demo matters within the platform. You know, that's one of the reasons we did that, was essentially people can go in, they can play around, they can actually see how this would work before they go into those live matters. We've got a few more questions here. So the next one's sort of similar to training and rollout. And I think this will depend on firm to firm, but the question is, what timeline would you recommend working towards for training and rollout? I guess this might depend on, again, why the reasons why you brought it in. Is it a particular group or a particular deal, that kind of thing?
Steve, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, look, there's kind of the rollout around sort of getting your internal systems, the operational side behind it, the integration, which Joe can talk to. The challenges around getting banks onboarded. That's, we face that, but actually that shouldn't be there to the same extent, so it should be quicker. In terms of rolling this out, actually hitting it properly with the ground running, so we embrace it integrate it into our trainee program. So when new trainees join the firm or join the banking team, we make sure there's a session on that about how to do it. So and that's on a sort of 6 monthly basis. So there's no reason why. Once you've got the technology set up, then which again Joe can talk to, but the sort of the rollout is, I think you just got to pick the right time to do it, and obviously you've got to integrate it into everything else you're doing as well. So is this a priority? One of the challenges we face with banks, and it's the same with us, right? So was that even if the bank's legal team can see that this is good technology, can see how it improve, they've got to take this to their internal stakeholders, their IT security guys, and get them to sign off. And actually improving CP checklists is not a top priority in the banks, right? The bank IT guy wants to say, I want to improve, actually save more money by improving the speed at which I do exchange rate conversions. Let's figure that one out. That's more important to them. So that whole could be the thing, and the same with a law firm. So it's kind of the priority that you give the technology internally. What are you trying to, where does it sit, and making sure that you bring it within your institution to the front of the queue at the right time. Because if not, you just won't have the adoption internally, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think Joe obviously add anything to this, but in terms of like our timelines for the implementation from a Legatics, from a system perspective, it's fairly short, really. Yes, there are integrations, but there's not usually any huge time delay on that. We can get people up and running within 2 weeks, essentially, if it's a simple kind of implementation with limited integrations. But it's importantly that they also are ready to go from the internal side as well, so that they've identified who's going to be the champions, who's going to roll it out, what the plan is, and also what the success criteria is, before we get going, so we've got something to come back and monitor against.
The one thing I just say that, Sally, as well, once from a purely legal perspective, from the lawyer perspective, actually once all that stuff is done, the actual entering into it and doing it is like, it's really quick. So, sort of when I did the first pilot, I played around with it a little bit, and it was, I knew within half an hour actually how this thing worked on the functionality. So that was really user-friendly, very intuitive. So from that perspective, that was really quick, but it's just some of the other challenges that you face. Yeah,
no, that's great. That's good feedback. Thank you. One of the other questions we've got, which I think is interesting, is around, given, I guess, the nature of the firm and the international and the breadth of the firm, have you seen the tool cut down on the amount of internal calls that take place?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a good thing.
Definitely. I mean, as I said, that functionality around what's in my inbox is just, you might you can obviously set the alerts from Legatics to whatever you want. So if you're not the lead on the matter, you might just want a weekly update. If you're the associate, I lost you. Sorry, I froze there for a moment. I don't know where I was about to say. If you're, you can then set the alerts on Legatics as to how often it notifies you when new documents have been uploaded for you to look at. So if you're the partner, you can do it sort of maybe it's once a day, once a week, depending on the matter. If you're a trainee, you might want it instantly because you're heading into execution mode. Equally, to be honest, even though it's not my matter, I'm not doing all the CPs. I quite frankly just keep it open, and it sort of pops up and tells you, sort of in the background. So so if and when I can see stuff happening without actually having to chase. So it's kind of just depends on how you want to use it, really. But definitely overall, it definitely reduces emails.
Thank you. We've got a couple of other questions I think are quite interesting because they're slightly different sort of topics what we've covered so far. First one is, what are your thoughts on how legal tech, or that having legal tech and a decent stack of legal tech helps attract and retain talent at your firm?
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, we do frequently get potential kind of trainee applicants or laterals asking about, or previously researching before their interviews, how we deal with technology and innovation. And we are, we've been in the FT innovative rankings top 10 for the last 2 years. So we're kind of known for it at this point, and I think it is. I mean, probably I'd say more the absence of a strong legal technology capability is will push people away, as opposed to it being actually an attraction, because I think there is that expectation now that whether you're going to be a paralegal or a trainee, or you're coming in as kind of a senior associate, there will be that kind of innovation, legal tech capability when you're coming in, and there will be tools you can get your hands on. That doesn't mean that we don't have to kind of force the narrative sometimes. That people do like to have that option. Yeah.
And the other thing I would just say to that is, you don't go to a job interview saying, "Do you have email?" That's what, do you know what I mean? That it's not necessarily that that type of environment where it's more a cultural thing. So what Joe and his team have done is embed in our training contract I'll say a seat. It's not really a seat, but as part of that, the trainees are required to do an innovation project and to embed that, so that they're constantly thinking about how they can improve systems. And invariably, it's people who haven't done this stuff before that are going to turn around and tell you, why are you doing it that way? There's a much better way of doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's sort of, and then sort of rewarding them and sort of giving them the plaudits that that they deserve for having come up with this idea to make something so much more efficient than what it was. So I think it's that sort of, it's to me, it's more like it's about empowerment and encouragement, and that sort of cultural change, or that sort of cultural part is probably more important than the actual tech itself.
Yeah, and we just want this to be like, BAU, as we've talked about before. This should just be how people are working. It shouldn't be seen as like, oh, I've got to do my innovation hour, or I've got to do my innovation project. Yes, people should be bringing these ideas and suggestions, and we should just be able to incorporate them and it's obviously improving, as we move on.
Some people, I mean, that innovation module, so all trainees have to do that in each one of their seats, pursuant to a few different categories, like design thinking or data visualization or robotic, like building a robot, automating a document. They have to do that. So some of them do see it as, oh, I've got to do it, but ultimately that allows us to get between 40 and 60 innovation projects per seat. Some of them pair up, so it's hard to quantify sometimes, but and out of that comes some incredible ideas. And so that's what, when I was referring to proactivity before, we've taken that proactive approach of everybody's got to do it, and actually ultimately they do come up with good ideas. They just have to be in that structure.
That's great, thank you. We're just going to have one more question before we wrap up, I think, and it's around costs. It's slightly different. So how do you go about recouping the costs of Legatics? And I'm thinking potentially this is perhaps the cost of initial or continued investment in the platform is what they are meaning, whether you try and report on that ROI.
So yeah, we are challenged on our spend. We need to kind of display year by year that it's kind of getting the usage. It is possible to do the counterfactual comparison of non-Legatics matters versus Legatic ones and see the benefit, but it's quite time consuming. So our reporting is generally based on kind of user quantities, user feedback, a rough idea of the total spend, and then kind of a go no go. Anything more onerous than that takes up too much of our time, and there is that recognition of to what level is really necessary to make the investment decision.
Yeah, and the other thing, from a client or client-facing perspective, we did have a discussion internally about whether or not we put the cost on as a disbursement to clients, and some other data rooms are done in that way. We don't in our sort of Dentons Direct side do that, but then we talked around that. We actually thought that was a barrier to adoption, as opposed to, so we swallowed that cost up, and actually for us, why are you putting in it, like any technology, why are you doing it, what's the benefit of it? And actually for us, it was fundamentally to reduce write-offs for that training time that we're talking about, and at that end of the process where it is administrative, and that's the value add that we see. And to a client, from a client perspective, they don't see, we probably would never have put that time on the file anyway. We would put it on the file, but we'd never put that on the bill and show it that time as a write-off to the client. So the client never saw what that time was, but we did. And so that's the value proposition for us, and that return on investment that Joe was talking about, plus the free time to do the other work that we talked about, the free people for matters and your delivery model generally.
That's great. Thank you very much. We're going to wrap up now. We've gone slightly over time, but thank you so much for your contributions and for your insights. I think it's been a really useful session. We've got through a lot, and I think it's been a good mixture of tech, people, and just change and process as well. So we've covered a lot of ground. I think we've answered most of the questions that we've had in the chat. If there's anything specific we haven't answered, we will follow up. By way of follow-up as well, early next week you'll get a copy of this recording, obviously with details of how you can find out more about Legatics as well. But just to say thank you to both of our panelists today and for everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Ellie.
Bye-bye.